Oxford Bookworms, Stage 3. Skyjack, by Tim Vickery. Published by Oxford University Press. This recording is copyright Oxford University Press, 1991. Chapter 1. The air hostess smiled. "Welcome aboard, sir. Would you like a newspaper?" "Yes, please." Carl took the newspaper and looked at his ticket. "I'm in seat 5F. Where's that?" "It's near the front of the plane, sir. On the left, there. By the window." "I see. Thank you very much." Carl smiled back at the air hostess. She was young and pretty. "Just like my daughter," he thought. He put his bag under his seat and sat down. His friend Harold sat beside him. They watched the other passengers coming onto the plane. Harold looked at his watch. 9:30 p.m., he said. "Good. We're on time." Carl agreed. "And in 3 hours we'll be home," he said. "That's good. We've been away for a long time." "You'll be pleased to see your family, won't you, Harold?" Harold smiled. "Yes, I will. Have you seen this, sir?" He opened his bag and took out 2 small planes. "These are for my sons. I always bring something back for them." "How old are your sons?" Carl asked. 5 and almost 7. The older one has a birthday tomorrow." "He'll be very excited tonight, then." "Yes. I hope he gets some sleep." The plane took off. Carl watched the lights of the airport grow smaller below them. Then the plane flew above the clouds, and he could see the moon and the stars in the night sky. He lay back in his seat and closed his eyes. Chapter 2. Later he woke up. Harold was asleep. Carl looked at his watch. It was midnight. He called the air hostess. "Excuse me, what time do we arrive?" 11:30 p.m. local time, sir. That's about half an hour from now." "Thank you." Carl changed the time on his watch. "Anything else, sir?" "No, I don't think so. Oh, wait a minute. Could I have a cup of coffee, please?" "Yes, of course, sir." He watched her bring the coffee. "She walks like my daughter, too," he thought. "And she is very young. She looks nervous, not sure what to do." "How long have you been an air hostess?" he asked. She smiled. 3 months, sir," she said. "Do you like it?" "Yes, I love it. It's very exciting." She smiled nervously. "Will that be all, sir?" "Yes, thank you." "Have a nice flight." He drank the coffee and started to read his newspaper. When Harold woke up, Carl showed him a page in the paper. "Look, there you are," he said. He pointed to a picture. In the middle of the picture stood Carl himself, a short, thin man with grey hair, wearing a suit. Behind him on the left was Harold, a tall, strong young man, like a sportsman. Both men were smiling. "That's you and me outside the embassy," said Carl. "We're in the news again. You can show it to your sons. You're a famous man, Harold." Harold laughed. "You're the famous man, sir, not me," he said. "I'm just a police officer. It's my job to take care of you. That's a photo of you, not me." "Perhaps. But your children think that you're a famous man, I'm sure. Here, take it and show it to them. Okay, thanks. Harold smiled and put the newspaper in his coat pocket. I think I'll have a cup of coffee too. He called for the air hostess, but she did not come. Harold looked surprised. What's the matter? Carl asked. The air hostess, Harold said. She's sitting down talking to those two men. Carl looked up and saw the young air hostess. She was sitting in a seat at the front of the plane with two young men. They looked worried and nervous. Suddenly, one of the young men picked up a bag and walked into the pilot's cabin. The other man and the air hostess followed him. That's strange, said Carl. What are they doing? I don't know. It's very strange, said Harold. I don't like it at all. He began to get out of his seat, but then stopped and sat down again. For 1 or 2 minutes nothing happened. None of the other passengers moved or spoke. They had seen the young men too. It became very quiet in the plane. A bell rang, and for a moment they could hear 2 voices arguing. Then the pilot spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. Please do not be afraid. There is a change of plan. We have to land at another airport before we finish our journey. There's no danger. We will land in 15 minutes. Please stay in your seats and keep calm. Thank you. Then the air hostess came out of the cabin. She looked very different now because she had a machine gun in her hand. She stood at the front of the plane and watched the passengers carefully. Chapter 3. Here we are, madam. The big black car stopped, and a police officer opened the back door. Thank you. Helen Sandberg smiled at him as she got out. Another police officer opened the front door of her house. Inside the house it was quiet. Her daughter was reading. She put the book down. Hello, Mummy. You're late. You said you'd be home by 10 o'clock. I wanted to talk to you about my homework, remember? Helen sat down. I'm sorry, Sarah. I did remember, really. But I had a very busy day. Anyway, I'm home now. What's the problem? It's this book, said Sarah. I have to write about it at school on Friday, and I don't understand it. All right, said Helen. Bring the book into the kitchen and I'll look at it while you make me a cup of coffee. They sat in the kitchen and talked for nearly half an hour. Then Helen looked at her watch. Okay, Sarah, that's enough for now. It's nearly midnight and I must be up at 6 tomorrow. I'm going to bed. Good night. Alone in her bedroom, she undressed and got into the big, empty bed. She was very tired. She closed her eyes, and in 3 minutes she was asleep. The phone rang at 12:15 a.m. Helen groaned and picked it up. Hello? What? Who? Do you know what time it is? She ran her hand through her hair and turned the light on. What, now? I don't believe it. Are you sure? The voice on the telephone explained carefully. Helen groaned again and sat up. I hope it is serious. If it isn't, somebody is going to be in big trouble. Yes, all right. Send the car in 15 minutes, then, and bring me some coffee. Goodbye. She put the phone down and got out of bed. Outside the window she could hear a strong wind blowing. 20 minutes later she was sitting in the back of her big black car, drinking a cup of coffee and talking to the chief of airport police, on the car telephone. It was raining heavily. Chapter 4. Carl looked out of the plane window. It was very dark and rainy. It was a small airport with only 1 or 2 other planes. But there were 3 police cars near the airport building. "I don't understand," he said quietly in Harold's ear. "Why are we here?" Harold looked worried. "Don't ask me," he whispered back. "Ask them." "No, thanks." Carl looked at the hijackers. The young air hostess was still standing at the front of the plane with her machine gun. One of the young men, also with a machine gun, was standing at the back of the plane. The other hijacker was in the captain's cabin. All the passengers sat very quietly in their seats. A bell rang, and a man's voice spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, listen to me. This is the People's Liberation Army. This plane is ours now, and you are our prisoners. We do not want to hurt you, but as you can see, we have our guns and we know how to shoot. So please, sit quietly in your seats and do what we say. We will be here for 1 or 2 hours. The government of this country has 2 of our brothers in a prison near this airport. We are asking the government to bring our 2 brothers to this plane. When our brothers are free, you will be free. We think this will take 1 or 2 hours, but not very long. As you know, the Prime Minister of this country is only a woman. She will do what we say. So do not worry. Just sit very still and wait a little while. Good night." Carl looked at Harold. "Oh, dear," he whispered. "I think we're in trouble, my young friend. Big trouble." Harold agreed. "We certainly are. The government won't set those 2 men free. They tried to put a bomb on a plane last year, didn't they, sir? They're in prison for 30 years. "I know," Carl whispered. "No one could set them free. So what about us?" "What about you, you mean?" whispered Harold. "I'm not important. Look, sir, you'd better give me your passport." "What? Why?" "Shh." Harold put his hand on the older man's arm and stopped talking. Carl looked up and saw the young air hostess staring at them. Her machine gun was pointing at them too. He stopped talking and looked out of the window. After a few minutes, she stopped watching them. "Give me the passport, sir," Harold whispered very quietly. Very slowly and carefully, Carl took it out of his pocket and gave it to him. There was still some coffee in Carl's cup. Very carefully, Harold put the passport on his tray and poured the coffee onto it. When the passport was very wet, he tore it slowly into little pieces. He was a strong young man, and because the passport was wet, it did not make a sound. Then one by one he put the pieces of wet paper into his mouth and ate them. In 10 minutes the passport had disappeared. "I don't understand," whispered Carl. "Why did you do that?" "You'll see," whispered Harold. "But when they ask questions, let me answer, sir, okay? You say nothing." "Okay." Carl looked away out of the window. A large black car was just driving up to the airport building. Chapter 5. The black car stopped outside the airport building and a police officer opened the door. Helen Sandberg got out and went quickly inside. Upstairs in the control room, the Chief of Airport Police, Inspector Home, was waiting with a soldier. Helen's secretary, Michael, was there too. "Good evening, Prime Minister," said Inspector Home. "This is Colonel Carter, of the Special Commando Section." "Good evening, Colonel." Helen shook hands with the soldier and looked at him. He was a thin, tough-looking man, about 40 years old, with a brown face. His hand was hard and strong. "I hope you know your job," she thought. "I may need you." She looked out of the window. There was a large plane on the tarmac about 200 meters away. All its lights were on. "Is that the plane?" she asked. "That's it, Prime Minister." "Right. Give me the facts. How many people are on it?" Inspector Home answered. 108 passengers, 5 crew. "What nationalities are they?" "There are 29 Americans, 15 British, 2 Brazilians, 2 Indians, and 1 Chinese. The others are from this country." "I see. There are a lot of Americans and British, then," said Helen quietly. "That means trouble." "Yes, Prime Minister," answered Michael. "I'm afraid their ambassadors are on their way here now." Helen smiled at him quickly. He was a good secretary. He usually knew what she was thinking. Both the American ambassador and the British ambassador were difficult people. She turned back to Inspector Home. "Tell me about the hijackers. What do they want?" "We don't know how many hijackers there are, Prime Minister. But they have guns, we know that. They say they are from the People's Liberation Army, and they want 3 things. Inspector Home paused and looked down at her. He was a very tall man, and he looked very important in his uniform. Helen didn't like him much. "Yes, well, what 3 things?" she asked quickly. "Firstly, they say we must set free their 2 brothers from prison. You remember, Prime Minister, 2 men tried to put a bomb on a plane last year. They are in prison near here." "I remember," Helen answered softly. "They're in prison for 30 years, aren't they?" "I think so. Something like that." The man paused. "Secondly, they say we must refuel the plane because they want to fly to another country. Thirdly, they say we must put this in all our newspapers. It says they are fighting for freedom for their people. They are freedom fighters. They want to liberate their people." He gave her a sheet of paper. Helen put it on the table. She did not read it. "And what about the passengers?" she asked. "When will the hijackers set them free?" "They say they will set most of the passengers free when their brothers are on the plane. But they want 10 passengers to fly away with them. They will set them free when they arrive." "I see." "There's one other thing, Prime Minister." Colonel Carter spoke for the first time. His voice was very quiet, almost gentle. "They say we must bring the prisoners to the airport in 2 hours. If not, they will kill a passenger. They said this 1 hour ago." "So we have 1 hour left?" "That's right, Prime Minister. Just 1 hour. Then they will kill the first passenger." "I see." Helen walked slowly to the window and stared out at the plane. It was still raining, and a strong wind was blowing. She turned round. "Thank you, gentlemen. I will have to talk to them. But first I need a few minutes to think. Colonel Carter, Inspector, please go to the other room. Tell the hijackers I will talk to them in 5 minutes. Michael, stay here." "But—" "Yes, madam." Inspector Home looked unhappy, but he went out slowly with the colonel. Michael sat quietly looking at her. He knew what she was thinking. Have you got the passenger list, Michael? Yes, Prime Minister. Here you are. She picked up the list of names and looked at it carefully. Oh, my God! His name was near the beginning. She dropped the list, sat down at the table, and ran her hands through her hair. For a long minute she said nothing. Then she looked up. This is going to be very difficult, isn't it, Michael? I'm afraid so, Prime Minister. Very difficult indeed. Helen stood up and walked to the window, thinking hard. Outside in the rain, the American ambassador's car stopped by the door.